Welcome to the training on the Single Adult VI SPDAT version 3, used in the Balanced Estate COC. What will be covered in this training? I'll review each section and question individually. I'll explain assessment questions that can sometimes cause confusion. I'll show examples of how the VI SPDAT might be answered and how to score it based on those responses. It's important to note that the Family and TAE VI SPDAT are built off of this single adult version, but have specific questions designed for families and youth. We'll review those questions in more detail in subsequent videos. Who to use it for? Who should a single adult VI SPDAT be used for? It's designed for adults age 25 and older who have no minor children present. It's important to note if multiple adults are present and want to live together, each adult should complete their own single adult VI SPDAT. And if the adult is pregnant and there's no other minor children, they should complete the single adult VI SPDAT. And then after the child is born, they should be reassessed with the family VI SPDAT. The VI SPDAT is structured in sections. The first section is the administration section, which will ask for the participant's information and key assessment details. That's followed up by opening speaking points, which is a summary of expectations and consent. After that, the section is on presenting needs, which will be questions around if the person's basic needs are able to be met while experiencing homelessness. That's followed up by housing history and chronic homelessness determination, which will look at the length of time and numbers of times someone's been homeless in the past 3 years, and if they have a disabling condition. That's followed up by vulnerability and housing support needs, which will be questions around experiences someone may have had while they've been experiencing homelessness, barriers, and the support needs. And the last section is scoring and contact information, which will look at recommended housing supports, as well as ask for contact information on where to find the individual in the community or how to get in touch with them for further follow-up communication. Key themes and questions. Some questions are asked only once, while others may appear more than once in different ways to help identify key themes or patterns in a person's experience. For sections that have a heading question and then follow-up questions, it can be helpful to repeat the heading question. For sections that reference a time frame, it can be helpful to count back 6 months and use a month and the year as an example. So if you're meeting with someone in June of 2025 and the question asks, in the past 6 months, it can be helpful to restate it and say, since January of 2025, have you experienced any of these things? Best practices for administering. How and where to administer the VI SPDAT. A VI SPDAT should be completed in a private, comfortable space with limited distractions. It's important to read the questions as they're written, but you can clarify or summarize the questions if that makes it easier to understand. Allow enough time for the assessment and any questions that the individual may have. And sometimes it might be helpful to remind the person that most questions only need a yes, no, or one-word response. Do not make any promises. And it can be super helpful to provide a list of community resources such as food pantries, showers, emergency shelters, outreach supports, housing navigation, low-income housing, and any other resources that are available in your community for people experiencing homelessness. And lastly, please do not score any part of the VI SPDAT when you're meeting with the client. Administration section. This section asks about the participant's information and key assessment details. If you've already completed other paperwork, like the HMIS intake document, you do not need to ask questions again when you already have the information. Looking at this section, On the left-hand side, the first question asks for the individual's first name, today's date, the start time and end time. And these two questions are optional and are only used to track how long an assessment might take with an individual. That's followed up by the survey location. Are you meeting with the individual in a shelter, during outreach, at a drop-in center, or other location? If the individual has previously completed a VI SPDAT. And this question is asked to determine if a VI SPDAT has already been done, and if so, a new one is not needed unless major life changes have happened since the previous VI SPDAT was done. If they completed a VI SPDAT previously, do they happen to know the score? On the right-hand side, it asks for the individual's last name, their race and ethnicity, their gender identity, with some examples like male, female, transgender, or other. If the individual identifies as LGBTQ2+, and that acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or two-spirited. The individual's date of birth, if they've ever served in the military, and if they have any pets. If someone says yes, that they have pets, it can be helpful to ask the types and number of pets. And it's also important to distinguish between pets and service animals. Opening speaking points. This is a summary of expectations during the assessment and consent. If consent has already been given by signing the Colorado HMIS ROI, it's okay to confirm that they still want to answer more questions on this VI SPDAT assessment. It's important for the assessor to be familiar with the Colorado HMIS ROI's best practices and expectations, so we've included a link to that training resource. You can summarize these opening speaking points by stating that the VI SPDAT assessment is a triage tool, that it will take approximately 10 minutes to answer the questions, depending on the responses, that most questions only require a yes, no, or one-word answer, that the individual can ask for clarification if they don't understand a question, that they can also skip or refuse to answer any question, that the answers to this VI SPDAT assessment will be stored in the HMIS database. It's important that the individual is as honest as they feel comfortable being, as some questions are personal in nature, that some questions may require further additional verification at a later time, and that the individual consents to answering the VI SPDAT questions. Section 1, Presenting Needs. These questions are around if basic needs are able to be met while experiencing homelessness. You'll notice the way question 1 is written, with the main question being under number 1, and then follow-up questions for A through G. When questions are written like this in the VI SPDAT, it's best practice to restate the initial question. I'll give you an example of this. On most days, can you find a safe place to sleep? And the responses are yes, no, or refused. On most days, do you have access to a bathroom when you need it? On most days, do you have access to a shower when you need it? On most days, can you get food? On most days, can you get water or other non-alcoholic beverages to stay hydrated? On most days, can you get clothing or access laundry when you need it? And on most days, can you safely store your stuff? You'll notice under option G, safely store your stuff, there's also an option for NA, for non-applicable. Additionally, you'll see in the red banner across the bottom how to score the VI SPDAT. As a reminder, You'd never want to score the SPDAT in front of the person you're meeting with, or focus on the score. And if you are doing the SPDAT assessment in the Colorado HMIS database, it will score it automatically. During this training, we're going to walk through an example of a fake scenario and how someone might answer the assessment so that you can see how to score it. You'll notice that the score says 1 point if there's a no response to any part of question 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, 1F, or 1G. And in this response scenario that we made up, the individual said no to 1A, 1F, and 1G. Therefore, the score would be 1. Section 2, Housing History and Chronic Homelessness Determination. In these set of questions, we'll be looking at someone's housing and homelessness history and if they have any disabling conditions. Question 2 says, how long has it been since you lived in stable, permanent housing? And you'll notice the responses needs to be written out in number of days, or months, or years. And this is the last time the person you're meeting with felt like the place they were staying was stable and permanent. Question 3. In the last 3 years, how many times have you been homeless? Question 4 is asked only if the answer to question 3 is 4 or more. If so, the question says, thinking about those last 3 years and the different times you were homeless, if you added up all the months you were homeless, what is the total length of time you have experienced homelessness in months? Question 5. Do you have a diagnosed, documented disabling condition? Yes, no, or refused. You'll notice the red scoring banner in this section, and that this set of questions can be a little tricky to score because someone must meet the length of time homeless and have a disabling condition. Let's walk through a scenario that might help you understand about scoring. In this scenario, the person said they've been unhoused, not lived in stable permanent housing for 1 year or longer. And they've only had 3 episodes in the last 3 years, so question 4 wasn't asked. Question 5, they do have a documented disabling condition. And because they have 1 or more consecutive years of homelessness and answered yes to question 5, they get 1 point for potentially meeting the definition for chronic homelessness. This determination may need to be verified at a later date. Continuing on in Section 2, Housing History and Chronic Homelessness Determination, we'll look over questions 6 and 7 that ask about rental and eviction history. Question 6. Have you ever lived in a home that you own or an apartment in your name? Yes, no, or refused. Question 7. Have you ever been evicted? Yes, no, or refused. You'll notice the scoring on this question says if they answer no to question 6 and or yes to question 7, they get 1 point. Let's look at a scenario for scoring purposes. The individual says they have had a lease in their name and they've never been evicted. Therefore, the score is 0. Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. This question will look at, in the last 6 months, the history of accessing community services. You'll notice the way that question 8 is written has an initial question and then follow-up questions, as well as asking someone to think back in the last 6 months. Therefore, it's most helpful to help count back time for 6 months, as well as restate the initial question when you ask the follow-up questions. So if we're asking this assessment in June of 2025, we would say, in the last 6 months, or since January of 2025, how many times have you gone to the emergency room or emergency department? You'll notice that the answer line is just a blank line, where it's asking you to put in the number of times the person says they've been to the emergency room or emergency department in the last 6 months in a number form. In the last 6 months or since January, how many times have you taken an ambulance? In the last 6 months or since January, how many times have you been hospitalized as an inpatient? In the last 6 months or since January, how many times have you used a crisis service or hotline for such concerns as family or intimate partner violence or suicide prevention? In the last 6 months or since January, how many times have you talked to the police because you witnessed a crime, were the victim of a crime, were the alleged perpetrator of a crime, or because they asked you to move along because of loitering, sleeping in a public place, or anything like that? And in the last 6 months or since January, how many times have you stayed 1 or more nights in a jail, holding cell, or prison? For question F, it's important to know that this question is asking for different episodes of stays in jail, holding cells, or prison, not the number of days that someone was incarcerated. Additionally, if you look at the scoring banner in the red, it's saying if the total number of interactions is 4 or more, the individual gets a score of 1. So if someone says in the responses they can't remember the exact number of times, you could just ask if it was 4 or more to get to the information needed for scoring. Let's walk through a scenario that might help us see how to score the answers to this. In this scenario, the individual says they've been to the emergency room or emergency department once, but never taken an ambulance in the past 6 months. They've been hospitalized 2 times for inpatient. They've talked to the police 3 times in the past 6 months and were not in jail, a holding cell, or a prison. Because the total encounters of all of those numbers add up to 6, which is more than 4, they get a score of 1. Continuing in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. Question 9 looks at threats of violence. You'll notice that the question is asked again as a main question and follow-up questions, so it's best practice to restate the initial question. Since you've been homeless, have you been beaten up or assaulted? Yes, no, or refused. Since you've been homeless, have you threatened to beat up or assault anyone else? Since you've been homeless, have you threatened to harm yourself or harmed yourself? Since you've been homeless, has anyone threatened you with violence or made you feel unsafe? Since you've been homeless, has anyone tried to control you through violence or threats of violence, whether that be a stranger, friend, partner, relative, or parent? You'll notice in the red scoring banner at the bottom, the individual gets 1 point if they answer yes to any part of question 9. And we'll look at another fictitious scenario for scoring purposes. In this scenario, the person answered yes to question 9A, 9D, and 9E. Therefore, they get a score of 1. Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. Questions 10 and 11 look at legal challenges. Question 10 says, do you have any legal stuff going on right now that may result in any of the following? Like being locked up? Yes, no, or refused. Do you have any legal stuff going on right now that may result in you having to pay fines or fees that you can't afford? Do you have any legal stuff going on right now that may result in or impact your ability to get housing? And do you have any legal stuff going on right now that may result in or impact where you could live in your housing? And question 11, have you ever been convicted of a crime that makes it difficult to access or maintain housing? Looking down at the red banner on how to score this question, you would score 1 point if they answered yes to any part of question 10 and or yes to question 11. Let's look at a scenario to see how this may have been answered and how we would score it. In this scenario, the answer to all the questions is no.
so the score would be 0.
Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. Question 12, 13, and 14 look at the sleeping location where someone stays, as well as other risks. Question 12 states, does anyone trick, manipulate, exploit, or force you to do things you do not want to do? And the options are yes, no, or refused. Question 13 says, where do you sleep most frequently? And asks for you to select one response. The options are shelters, transitional housing, safe haven, couch surfing, outdoors, a car or vehicle, or other. It's important to note that a safe haven is not a domestic violence shelter, and the federal definition, according to HUD, says it's a form of supportive housing that serves hard-to-reach homeless persons with severe mental illness who have been unable or unwilling to participate in housing or supportive services. So if someone has been staying at a domestic violence shelter, you would select the shelters option. You'll also see an option for couch surfing, which means the person is staying with others such as friends or family on a temporary basis. Even though couch surfing is not defined as literal homelessness by HUD, it may be considered unstable housing or a form of homelessness. And please don't use the other option unless the place where the individual is staying is not on the list, as other can affect the score. Question 14 states, do you ever do things that may be considered to be risky or harmful, like run drugs, share a needle, do sex work, or anything like that? You'll notice in the red scoring banner at the bottom, the person gets a score of 1 if any of the conditions are met. A yes to question 12, if the person is staying in any place other than a shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven, or if there's a yes response to question 14. Let's look at a scenario of how this might have been answered and what the score would be. In this scenario that we made up, the score would be 1 because the person is staying in their car. Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs, questions 15, 16, and 17 ask about debts owed and income received. Question 15 states, is there anybody that thinks you owe them money, like a family member, friend, past landlord, business, bookie, dealer, bank, credit card company, utility company, or anyone like that? And the responses are yes, no, or refused. Question 16 states, do you get any money from the government, a job, working under the table, day labor, an inheritance or pension, or anything like that? And question 16 can be summarized to ask if there's any money coming into the household. It's also important to note that if the person receives food stamps or SNAP benefits, they are not considered money from the government in this question, or what this question is asking about money. Question 17 states, do you ever gamble with money you can't afford to lose or have debts associated with gambling? Let's look at the red scoring banner in the bottom, which states, the score is 1 if any of the following conditions are met. If there's a yes to question 15, or a no to question 16, or a yes to question 17. Let's look at a scenario of how this might have been answered and what the score would be. In this scenario, the person does not have debts owed, but does receive some sort of money. Therefore, the score is 0.
Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs, questions 18 and 19 ask about hobbies and personal belongings. Question 18 says, do you have planned activities other than activities for survival at least 4 days per week that make you feel happy and fulfilled? This is asking, or can be summarized as if the person has hobbies that they participate in at least 4 days a week. Question 19 says, do you have a collection of belongings that gets in the way of your ability to access services or housing? This is asking if the person has belongings they can't leave or don't feel comfortable leaving to go get supports or services and apply for housing. Let's look at a scenario of how this might have been answered and what the score will be. You'll notice question 18 and 19 are scored individually. In this scenario, question 18, the answer is no, and the score is 1. And in question 19, the answer is yes, therefore the score is also 1. Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. Questions 20 and 21 ask about relationships and family supports. Question 20 states, would you say that your current homelessness was caused by any of the following, like a relationship that broke down? Or would you say your current homelessness was caused by an unhealthy or abusive relationship? And would you say your current homelessness was caused because family or friends caused you to lose your housing? Question 21. Do most of your family and friends have stable housing? It's important to note the scoring for this question looks at both question 20 and 21, even though they fall on separate pages of the paper VI SPDAT form. Now let's look at a scenario that we created and see how this would be scored. In this scenario, the person said yes to 20A, 20B, 20C, and question 21. Therefore, the score is 1.
Continuing on in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs. Questions 22, 23, and 24 look at age, support needs, and pregnancy. Question 22 states, are you 60 years of age or older? And you may recall earlier in the assessment we asked for the individual's date of birth. So if you know that they're over the age of 60, you could just verify that information and mark yes. Or if you know that they're under the age of 60, you could verify that information and mark no. Question 23 states, do you have any physical or mental health issues or cognitive issues, including a brain injury, that would require assistance to access or keep housing? And this question can be summarized to ask if the person needs ongoing help or assistance to access or keep housing due to their disability. Question 24 states, are you currently pregnant? And this is only asked if applicable. Looking at the red scoring banner in the bottom, you'll notice the score is 1 if there's a yes response to any one of these questions. Now let's look at a scenario of how this might have been answered and what the score would be. You'll notice there's a no response to all 3 questions. Therefore, the score is 0.
Staying in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs, question 25 asks about alcohol and drug challenges. Question 25 states, do you use alcohol or drugs in a way that impacts your life in a negative way most days? And you'll notice the responses are yes, no, refused, or non-applicable. Do you use alcohol or drugs in a way that makes it hard to access housing? And do you use alcohol or drugs in a way that would require assistance to maintain housing? Moving on to the red scoring banner, you'll notice that someone gets a score of 1 if they answer yes to any part of question 25. Again, we'll walk through a scenario about how this might have been answered. In this scenario, the person refused to answer question 25. And as we stated earlier in the training, the person has a right to refuse any question, but that would make the score 0.
Finishing up in Section 3, Vulnerabilities and Housing Support Needs, questions 26 look at medications, and 27 asks about past trauma and abuse. Question 26 states, are there any medication that for whatever reason a doctor said you should be taking, but you're not taking? And the responses are yes, no, refused, or non-applicable. Are there any medications that for whatever reason you sell instead of taking? Are there any medications that for whatever reason you use in a way other than how it's prescribed? And are there any medications that for whatever reason you find impossible to take, forget to take, or choose not to take? And you'll notice the red scoring banner for question 26 says the score is 1 if there's a yes response to any part of that question. Moving on to question 27, it states, Has your homelessness been caused by any recent or past trauma or abuse? And this is just from the individual's perspective if they believe their homelessness situation was caused by trauma or abuse. And the responses are yes, no, or refused. Looking at the red scoring banner, you'll notice question 27 has its own score of 1 if the response is yes. Now let's look at a scenario of how this might have been answered and what the scores would be. In this scenario that we made up, the individual says yes to question 26, part D, therefore the score is 1. They also say yes to question 27, therefore the score is 1 for that question. You'll notice we're at the end of the VI SPDAT assessment as there's a total score box. If we go back and add up the responses to all the questions in the scenario that we made up, the total score is 10. There's a couple important things to remember about scoring. 1, do not score the VI SPDAT in front of the person you're meeting with. And if you do the VI SPDAT in the Colorado HMIS database, it will be scored automatically for you. And lastly, it's important to remember that people are more than a score, and the score is only one factor that communities may use for prioritization and eligibility. Scoring range and contact information. Historically, org code and communities that use the VI SPDAT have looked at scores to help inform the housing intervention that may be best for participants. In the Balance of State COC, we're trying to view this as more of a detail for participants, but not the only detail that should be considered, with certain regions developing community-driven prioritization criteria above and beyond VI SPDAT scores. Let's look at the red box and recommended courses of action based on the VI SPDAT score. These are just recommendations and say that if someone scores between a 0 and 3, that they may only need the least intensive service supports, which might include 1 month's rent or deposit assistance. And if they score between a 4 or 7, they may need moderate or often time-limited supports like transitional housing or rapid rehousing. And if they score 8 or higher, they may need high-intensity supports that last for a longer duration of time, or perhaps even permanent, like permanent supportive housing. It's important to get contact information that can include a cell phone number or email address, outreach location, and where they can be found in the community, as well as contact information for family, friends, or caseworkers that they're connected with, as these will be the way someone will reach out to them if they're selected for a housing resource. That concludes the training on the single adult VI SPDAT. Up next, we'll take a closer look at the family VI SPDAT, including who to use it for, how it's structured, and questions that are specific for families and children.